Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. At this time, I am Kumar. I am Nimu Masi's younger sister's son. So she's my Masi by relationship, but more than my mother in the true relationship of life. So today we are here to celebrate Masi hitting a century. What an innings that has been in her life, 100 years. Not just lived, but lived in style. That's who Nimu Masi is, right? Century with the style of a Sachin Tendulkar, the grace of Wahida Rahman, and the creativity of Javed Chand Nigani. Now, half of you don't know who I'm referring to. But that's what it takes to live a century and be a couple of generations older than all of us. You have to be an Indian at heart and live through a couple of generations to realize these references. But that's okay. Nimu Masi got all of them, I'm sure. Just to put 100 years and the year 1921, when she was born, in perspective, what do 100 years mean? The world's population is 4 times larger than it was when she came to the earth. 4 times. Less than 2 billion to less than 8 billion now. That crackling sound of shortwave radio and Amin Sayani presenting Vinaga Geetmala, that started when she was already 30 years old. Most of you don't even know what Vinaga Geetmala is. But some of us who were young enough in those days in India listened to that on the radio. And she was already 30 years old. And playing radio at home required a license in India till she was 50 years old. Imagine that. In order to play a radio at home, you needed a license. Television came to India when she was already almost 50 years old, 1971. That's when right around then, the television came to India first. The first personal computer was made when Masi was already 53 years old, 1974. She probably didn't have a home phone line till she was almost 40 years old. And the mobile phone that we all depend on so much came to her life when she was already older than most people in this room, in her 60s or later. 100 years, that's what it is like. 100 years, that's pretty immense. And a human heart, this is an engineer talking now. A human heart beats about 4.2 billion times in 100 years. That's what it takes. 4.2 billion times. Mathematician and engineer, I had to find something like that. But speaking of heart, this is where we come to the first of the biggest traits of Nimu Masi that I want to talk about. A big heart, a generous heart, that's what defines her. That's what people around her have always experienced. It's not the number of beats, 4.2 billion means nothing. It's the bigness, the generosity, the tendency of giving that Abdul Wahid so eloquently talked about. That's what defines Nimu Masi and what she means to all of us. That helping hand, the genuine interest in well-being of everybody else around her. We have all experienced that, and plenty of people outside of this room have also experienced that throughout her life. Nirmala Doshi, that's what her maiden name was. She was born in Jamnagar in 1921. Daughter of Tribhuvan Das Kalidas Doshi and Lakshmi Ben Doshi. And she was the 6th, either 5th or 6th, even out of her I could not figure out whether she was the 5th grandchild or the 6th grandchild of Kalidas Virji Doshi family. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And she was the 5th or 6th of 20 cousins of that generation. At the age of 12, she suffered through a typhoid, meningitis and pneumonia back to back and barely survived there. After a year of treatment, she came out of that. And out of that, basically coming out of the illness, the family circumstances, the joint family, the responsibilities of the family, the formal schooling went out the window at the age of 12 and roughly 5th or 6th grade. And the confluence of all of those circumstances basically gave her the responsibility to run the household. And then that brings me back to the 20 cousins, because she was instrumental in raising many of the younger siblings that came after her, the 14 of them that followed, basically. It was a joint family system. Four brothers, her father and his three brothers were like a joint family almost, not quite, but almost. And she took the responsibility of raising a lot of the cousins in her young age and her formative years. And so that's the one thing you hear when you talk to her cousins. So my mother and her siblings, that's the one thing that she has made the most lasting impression and biggest impact in their formative years, in her formative years, in bringing them up and raising them in their childhood. That gentle, that caring, that big heart we just talked about, left an indelible mark on the family, on all the cousins. And that's why we are here to celebrate on behalf of all of those siblings, all of the second generation that followed, and all the love that she gave. After a few years of doing that for the family, she decided to go back to studying. That lust for knowledge, that the curiosity, that never went away after she formally left the school. She finished her SSC, which was the GED equivalent for those of you who know American school system. And then she went back to do college and finished BA in Hindi. And then became a radio announcer, and she used to teach Hindi literature as well at the same time. And that's when you realize that the thing about learning never stopped for her in her life. Hasn't ever stopped. And her advice to others about learning has also never stopped. And she played a big role in my life, I would say personally, in my formative years and my young years, and the impact that she left on me. I can honestly say that my interest in science, my interest in literature, my interest in reading is thanks to her. Without her, I would not have developed half the things that I did. She would often send me gifts. When we used to live in Bombay, she was in Ahmedabad, and on occasion I would receive gifts from her. And the gifts would invariably be books. Some books that she would choose for me to read and make sure that I read them. And she would ask me later, hey, you read that book? I had to read that. And I still very fondly remember some of the books she sent me. One of them in particular was about Sardar Patel and Gandhiji playing practical jokes on each other and their repartee, their dialogues and stuff. There was a whole book written on that. Sardar Patel was a prankster, as many of you from that generation probably know, and he used to play all sorts of pranks on Gandhiji and Nehru in those days. And there was a book written about the interaction between the two of them, Sardar Patel and Gandhiji, and the pranks they played on each other as well as on Jawaharlal Nehru. Apparently Jawaharlal Nehru was a very serious guy. He was not much of a prankster, but these two were. And I still fondly remember that book. It was a funny book, but at the same time, it introduced me to two great historical personalities of our era, of that generation, and introduced us to the values that they carried in a very subtle way, in a book that was appropriate for a 7th grader to read, but introduced to the greatest of personalities. This was classic diplomacy. It wasn't just a gift, it was a gift of knowledge, it was a gift of Indian history, it was a gift of Indian personalities and learning about them, appreciating our culture, appreciating our background, and truly understanding who we are. So gift wasn't just a gift, it was a lot more than that. It wasn't just a book, it was a lot more than that. With that, and that was the hallmark diplomacy for me. That's what she represented, that's what she meant in my life. With that, diplomacy, I wish you a very happy birthday and many happy returns. And I think we should make this an annual tradition and be together to celebrate your birthday.